German meatballs and caper sauce, Kettwurst, and the counterculture in the former East Germany. This week, we're in Berlin.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel podcast for foodies. Destination Eat Drink is where food and travel intersect, right here on the Destination Eat Drink podcast and at destinationeatdrink.com and on the YouTube channel at Destination Eat Drink 946. This week, we're in the foodie hotspot of Berlin, Germany. But first, if you like the show, please rate and review Destination Eat Drink on your podcast app. Only takes a second, really helps the show. Thank you for that. And if you can, please support Destination Eat Drink with a one-time or recurring contribution at buymeacoffee.com/Destination Eat Drink. You can contribute as little as $1 a month or do a one-time contribution in any amount. Thank you very, very much. Margot and Alex are the founders of Walk With Us Tours in Berlin. Margot is a Los Angeles transplant. Alex is a native from Germany, and both of them have extensive experience in gastronomy and food tourism. They talk with me about one of the most diverse cities in Europe and tell me why craft beer is taking off in Berlin, why international cuisine is important to the vegan food scene, and why they don't serve currywurst or doner on their tours. Plus, a little diversion into the punk rock scene of the former East Germany. Okay, I'm starving, so let's eat.
Destination Eat Drink.
Margot and Alex from Walk With Us Tours in Berlin. I'm anxious to talk to you about one of my favorite cities in all of Germany and all of Europe and all of the world. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
So I want to talk about a couple neighborhoods in Berlin and where you guys do tours. So let's start. Tell me a little bit about where you guys do your tours in the former East Germany and what makes them interesting.
Maybe starting with Friedrichshain. Prenzlauder Berg and Friedrichshain. Both of the neighborhoods have, in a way, a similar kind of history. Both old industrial neighborhoods of Berlin. Both really got developed and urbanized in the course of industrialization, so mid-19th century here in Berlin. And both heavily hit during air raids in 45, specifically during what historians call the Battle of Berlin, for the last heavy fights in the streets and the last heavy fights during the Second World War. And so it were two neighborhoods that basically had to reinvent themselves, had to be reborn, resurrected. And then also both neighborhoods were part of former East Berlin, so a part of the first Soviet occupation zone, and then the communist state of Germany. So you find quite similar, particularities and similar histories. What happened also in both neighborhoods was right when the wall came down, there was a lot of unused industrial space that then was appropriated by the subculture. For example, Friedrichshain is known for techno and house music, a lot of institutions and nightclubs in this subculture located there, as well as Prenzlauder Berg, known for a lot of locally owned cafes, bars, restaurants. It was just incredibly affordable or even cheap to either buy a space for your gastronomy or for your bar or for your little independent clothing store or so. And that is why in the mid and 90s, a lot of people, for example, in Prenzlauder Berg, but as well as in Friedrichshain, started to create a quite vibrant local bar gastronomy scene. Like I said, an interesting art scene, and now I would say form a bit two alternative neighborhoods of Berlin. At the same time, you of course have extreme process of gentrification in these neighborhoods. That's of course a topic of every Berliner neighborhood, but specifically in areas that come from communist price levels. When you see the relative increase rates in Prenzlauder Berg or so, it's now some corners of it are one of the most expensive places to live. So you have that story. And so what interested us in these neighborhoods is that in a very concentrated way, you have a lot of great gastronomies, interesting, mom and pop shops, wine bars, microbreweries, and so on. And that is why we decided to run our tours there. That's pretty much why we picked these two. Yeah, and maybe Margot has anything to add to this.
Both of the areas, we wanted to stay in East Berlin because we feel that it's underrepresented, or maybe still has kind of a shadow casted over it, even though the wall fell decades ago. So I think it's nice for a traveler to come and explore an area that they might not make it to, because, for example, on our tours, you're not going to see the most famous sites like Brandenburg Gate or, Tiergarten, or some of the bigger sites that are kind of there in the Mitte area. Of course, each Berlin district is very, very special and unique and has different things to offer. But these are where we hang out. These are areas that we enjoy going to, and I think a lot of Berliners as well. And I think that the traveler today is more interested in seeing how the people who live there are living and the places that they're going, because I think myself as a traveler and visiting other places, I don't want to go to the places where all the tourists are getting dropped off. I want to see where do the people live? Where do they go? What do they eat? What do they drink? And that was really important for us to showcase that in tours, because at the end of the day, we don't want to, give a tour about something that we're not in love with and passionate about. And, Alex being born in East Germany, it's more of an authentic story that we get to tell based on our experiences here in Germany.
It's interesting that you bring this point up, Margot and Alex, because I think when you go to a big city like Berlin, like Paris, like London, everyone knows the big sites, and they're relatively easy and accessible to see. I mean, if you want to go see the Brandenburg Gate, it's easy to get there, and it's easy to find information about Brandenburg Gate and why it's important and why it's historic. What's more difficult is to find your way to insert yourself into a neighborhood like Prenzlauder Berg or Friedrichshain. And this is why I like your guys' tours. Let's talk specifically about Prenzlauder Berg first, because I know that this was an area that was, back when it was East Germany, before the 90s, it was kind of a hotspot of counterculture in East Germany. And I'm just curious if there's any remnants of that left, because when I think of East Germany, when I think of the communist bloc, I don't necessarily immediately think of a counterculture of hippies or a gay community or something like that being there. I think of more the representation that we saw in the media when I was growing up as kind of a gray place that was rather stoic. And I don't think necessarily of a counterculture. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. You're totally right. There were just a few areas, usually in bigger cities in Germany, and Berlin, East Berlin as the hub for that, where you had something like an East German counterculture, where you had something like almost like an anti-regime culture. So And what you also said is interesting, because I think, how we get taught history and the media representation of certain areas like the communist bloc, like you mentioned. It's of course, in order to make it easier for people to understand it, it will maybe generalize a little bit. Yeah. But as we all know, history is that easy. It's always multifaceted and has a lot of different nuances. So specifically for Prenzlauer Berg, what happened there, and that's quite interesting. You first needed a space for the subculture to basically, hang out there, connect with each other, organize themselves, and so on. And what you saw in Prenzlauer Berg specifically was that a lot of like old buildings there that were constructed under the Prussian rule, so usually from like 1870 to 1910. A lot of like what we call Gründerzeithäuser, so these older Prussian buildings. They were completely neglected. They were basically crumbling, falling apart. No one wanted to live in them. The only ones that really, decided to live in them because they didn't really care about the quality of the living or didn't have money to afford another place, were like artists, students, culture dissidents, you could say, of any kind. And this is how these like old run-down neighborhoods of Prenzlauer Berg turned into the hub for people that might always thought a little differently about their own system, the politics, the political economic situation in general. Like I said, artists. Of course, I think for me, essence of art is always like coping with your environment, with existing power structures, political structures, and so on. So artists, musicians specifically, were very influential in like kind of triggering the discussion, and also being able to create a certain network within these like little, you can say, countercultural enclaves of Prenzlauer Berg, where people really connected. And if you look where one of the first checkpoints in November 9th, 89 opened up, it was actually in the north of Prenzlauer Berg at Bornholmer Straße checkpoint, at a bridge called Bösebrücke. And so a lot of anti-regime protest that then consequently was leading to the opening up of the checkpoints and the fall of the communist regime, of course, with a lot of other very complex political economic factors, you have to also say. But let's say from a grassroots civil right level, it came a lot out of these like little countercultural communities of Prenzlauer Berg, Friedrichshain. And one aspect is these neighborhoods, they are just big. Yeah. They are just like huge neighborhoods at the end of the day. Prenzlauer Berg, Friedrichshain, they're literally own cities. If you just look, I think Friedrichshain has like 160,000 people these days living just in Friedrichshain, in one little district of Berlin. And there was never a chance for Stasi, or what officially was called MFS, Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, then later colloquially called Stasi, so the secret police in the East, or Popos, Volkspolizei, or the military and so on, to 100% infiltrate every corner of these bigger Berliner neighborhoods. And that kind of, gave the chance to the counterculture to be actually able to organize the protest, to get together without, being necessarily always spied on. And what is interesting, that when you look at the history of what we call the peaceful revolution in Germany, so the fall of the wall, but from a, let's say, civil right level, grassroots level, you look at churches, pastors in churches that basically opened up their sacred space for the protesters, where then the protesters, for example, in Prenzlauer Berg, famous church that is mentioned in every history book in Germany, the church called Gethsemane Church. This is where pastors opened up the space, invited the protesters, gave them the safe space, because even in fall 89, people were still arrested on the streets, were brought to police stations, even tortured there and so on. The pastors open up the space in the churches for the political opposition to organize themselves from there, to get together, to talk, to debate, discuss, and then, to organize the mass protest waves, because the Stasi and secret police was not 100% allowed. And the churches, even though obviously the East German state was by definition an atheist state, that doesn't mean that churches didn't exist or that people didn't go to church. The churches were kind of sacred spaces, had their, even within the East German system, their own kind of status. So the pastors kind of ruled the space of the churches and said, guys, you stay out and let the protesters come in and do their thing. And that is, I think, pretty ironic that in an atheist state like communist Germany or East Berlin back then, the social and political change and progress came out of the churches, right? That's kind of ironic. But I think these neighborhoods just offered first the physical space for the counterculture to then appropriate these spaces. And that, created also a network of, you could say, countercultural movements or subcultural movements, great punk music, anti-regime punk music, like Renft combo stuff that my father was listening to. People always think that in East Germany, they only wrote regime music, basically flattering the regime and so on. But there was a lot of like subversive music as well. And, maybe not so known to a lot of people, but you're right when you say that Prenzlauer Berg was the hub for political opposition and counterculture in East Germany.
I didn't realize that there was a punk music hotbed going on in East Germany, but it makes sense because in Berlin they love punk music, because I know, if I'm not mistaken, there is a Ramones museum in Berlin, or at least there was at one point. So there must be a thirst for punk music there. Ramones are one of my favorites too.
Mine too, for sure. Ramones, Sex Pistols, and the Clash, all the good old stuff.
Yeah.
But there was something like in East Germany. There's a just really interesting exhibition right now in Prenzlauer Berg. Museum in der Kulturbrauerei, they show even heavy metal and hip hop culture within East Germany. Quite interesting. It existed. It was obviously minor, and on a broader societal level, it was not like relevant in this way, but it existed. There's, like I said, a lot of more nuances to that than people might think.
Margot, I wanted to ask you about Prenzlauer Berg because Alex kind of mentioned how it's changing, how it has changed since the wall came down and the reunification. But you guys do a couple of tours there, and one of them is a gourmet food tour. So I'm wondering, what is it about the food culture that makes Prenzlauer Berg so fascinating for you?
One of the great things I think about Prenzlauer Berg and also our gourmet food tour is that the places that we go, they're really paying a tribute to not only German food, but regional food and, having modern twists on classical dishes, as well as very traditional old German restaurants that we visit that stick to the classics, which is actually very funny because you start to see a resurgence of bringing back these classic dishes. For example, one of the dishes that we have on our gourmet tour is called Königsberger Klopse, and it is a very, very delicious meatball and with a caper sauce, and it is wonderful. So very interestingly enough, probably the most famous chef coming out of Berlin is Tim Rau. And he has several restaurants here in Berlin, including a 2 Michelin star restaurant, which is many, many times over been ranked, one of the top restaurants in the world. And even though his original restaurant here is kind of an Asian fusion based restaurant, he now has a classic German menu at his restaurant where he is serving dishes like Königsberger Klopse. And just recently, I saw as well that he is going to be taking over the restaurant space of the TV tower, where he will again be bringing back these old traditional East German dishes. And, I might say some things that upsets Alex because, of course, he knows better than I do about what is German or not German or East or West. But I think this is really interesting because we start to see not only in the 2 Michelin star restaurants, but also very nice, modern, new restaurants. For example, Alex, what is the one there? Trio. Exactly. Trio. Mm-hmm. Amazing restaurant. Again, creating a beautiful new chic space, but having these old dishes. And I love that we get to serve these dishes on our gourmet tour in a very old setting, an old restaurant, very beautiful with a lot of history, of course. And, then we make our way to another stop, a gourmet shop, where all of the products in the store are coming from the region of Brandenburg, which, we are surrounded by farmland. And as coming from California, where we grow everything there, not everything, but a lot of different vegetables and fruits and nuts. I never thought of Germany as a place that had a lot of farms and a lot of vegetables. But recently I was just curious. So I looked on a website to see during these months, what vegetables are available. And I can tell you that in spring, in June, early summer, we have about 30 to 35 different types of vegetables that are grown here in Germany, which is pretty incredible because before moving here, always thought, okay, Germany is beer and potatoes, right, and they don't really have much more to offer. So I love that we get to bring people and tell them that and show them that and let them taste all of these wonderful things that this, not only Germany has to offer, but this region. And at the same time, paying tribute to the old with the new, supporting small businesses who support small farmers and small businesses. And I love that we get to, not only talk about these things, but actually practice what we preach and what we care about and what is important to us. And Prenzlauder Berg has that to offer, on every block. And you might not see it when you walk by. And I think a lot of people, when you look at it, there are still a lot of parts, especially in Friedrichshain, but also in Prenzlauder Berg, that they don't look so nice. You have a lot of graffiti, just maybe to the eye of a newcomer, they might think, oh, this doesn't look nice. But when you start walking in the streets and you start looking at the shops and the restaurants and the bars and the people, you get a really, really nice vibe. And it's a lot of hidden treasures and surprises. And I love that we get to show people that.
Yeah, so you've got the gourmet food tour on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end you've got the street food tour, and that's also in Prenzlauer Berg. Tell me about that, because when I think of street food in Berlin, immediately what comes to my mind is currywurst and doner kebab. And
yes.
Right.
I don't know if you guys offer that on your street food tour, but I imagine it's much more than that.
We
Yes.
actually, I think we actually pride ourselves to be the first food tour business in Berlin that doesn't serve currywurst.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, nothing against currywurst, and nothing against food tours that offer that. But if you live here, if you come from here, if you know Berlin, then I also think there's a lot more to it. And like you said, when people think about street food in Berlin, it's like Currywurst, Döner, and incredible Currywurst, incredible Döner here for sure. But there's also a lot more to it. And we try to, with our street food tour, we try to take people on a little ride through Prenzlauder Berg, a little different part of the neighborhood compared to our gourmet tour, and try to show them, like, when we go out, eat and drink, where do we go to, right? And I can tell you, if you live in Berlin, you not go to a currywurst place every other day, or you don't eat döner every day. I still, get döner here and there, and I love it if it's a good one. But there's so much more to it, and the multiculturalism of the city is nowadays so took a whole nother level. I mean, Berlin counts as one of the most multicultural places in Europe, if not in the world, by just the sheer number of nationalities living within the city. And so that I thought was a little underrepresented. We still have a nice East Berliner snack on the tour that actually didn't make it much out of East Berlin. Yeah. So if you talk about street food from back then during East Berliner times, this is also what we have reflected on our food tour. But we also go to a Chinese place and so on. Yeah. So really reflecting a bit the diversity of the city, and maybe going a bit beyond, let's say, the cliches and stereotypes. I don't think you necessarily have to come on a food tour to eat currywurst. That is just my opinion, but that's what we
sure, it's
we try
everywhere.
to create a little. And we try to create a little different model, and also to position ourselves, to differentiate ourselves, just from a business perspective. I don't think that Berlin needs another food tour business that offers currywurst and kebabs. Yeah, I think at one point it's saturated, and if you don't find your niche, then it's just difficult to stand out and to compete. And besides that, we think that there's so much more layers to it, and so much more, behind the curtain, behind the iron curtain, you could say.
What's the name of that East German snack that you said didn't make it out of East Berlin?
It's called Kettwurst.
Kettwurst. Okay.
Kettwurst, not like the animal cat. K-E-T.
Kettwurst.
Sometimes written with double T. I think officially it was supposed to be just with one T, K-E-T, and then Wurst, like sausage. Yeah. Maybe look it up. It's kind of the counter model to the West Berliner hot dog.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And did you grow up eating this?
I did. Yeah. I remember as a child, I was like big into football, soccer, the real football. No offense.
Not the American. Hey, there's American football's coming to Germany this year.
Right. No, for sure. They're here. And people, like, I have friends, they're watching it actually. They're into it. They like stay up all night to watch Super Bowl these days.
Right.
Yeah, but I remember, like, the very first Kettwurst I had was at the Berliner Olympic Stadium. It was like a football game. I went back there with my dad and with my uncle, and I was like probably 8-9 years old or so, and then I really liked it, and so there's this place in Prenzlauder Berg that has a long history of serving that. Already during the 80s, people would go there. And it's just a place where people still speak like Berliner Schnauze, Berliner slang, Berliner Snout, you would say. And yeah, it's just really authentic and just a great little snack that we have on the street food tour.
In the same way that the gourmet tour is kind of a tribute to German food, the regional foods of Brandenburg and Berlin and East Germany, I think that our street food tour is a dedication to the international community here in Berlin, because like Alex said, we have so much more to offer than currywurst or schnitzel or, liters of beer. Not all of Germany is the same, and Berlin is definitely not like the rest of Germany. And like Alex was saying, we actually have over 190 different nationalities living in Berlin, which is one of the largest international communities in the world. So it would be amiss to not include that, because for me personally, these are the foods that I like to eat. I like to finally get a nice taco. Growing up in Los Angeles, we have the best Mexican food.
Yes.
And here it was really hard to find. But then all of a sudden, as the international community grew, so did the food places and the food offerings. And it's just so diverse. And there's so many good places, and they're opening up new ones all of the time. And there's so much competition in Berlin nowadays for food and gastronomy and, just the whole gastronomy business, that if you're not doing it well or doing, something really outstanding, it's going to be tough to compete. So we as the consumers are really lucky because we get to eat some amazing food.
I love seeing these new cultures come in and bring their food with them. My friend in Los Angeles, who's an actor and TV host, Rupak Jin, he calls it culinary diplomacy, because when good food comes in, it makes a really strong argument for allowing more immigration and allowing more people coming in, because you're tasting this delicious food and you're like, I want more of this,
I love that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Margot, you mentioned liters of beer. I'm not opposed to having a liter of beer, but you guys do a craft beer tour. I would imagine there's not liters of beer because you can't drink that much beer on a tour. But you must go to some pretty cool places. This is in the Friedrichshain neighborhood. Tell me about craft beer in Berlin and Friedrichshain specifically.
What we just talked about with the food scene, and of course beer scene as part of the broader culinary scene, what you see also reflected in the craft beer scene is that a lot of international people, so American brewmasters, guys from Scandinavia, from the UK, from Netherlands, Belgium, and so on, they kind of are influential these days in maybe creating and shaping a new beer culture, maybe breaking with the very traditionalist approach to German beers, and also getting together with German Berliner brewmasters that come from the old German craftsmanship when it comes to beer, and fusing two brewing or multiple brewing traditions, multiple approaches in regards to beer together and create something new. And I think that's the story of all aspects of life within Berlin and in Berlin. But that's also very true for the craft beer scene. So you find, of course, traditional German lagers, well brewed, but you also find like some crazy pink guava passion fruit sour.
Cool.
That is also a part of the scene. Also, on that note, Berlin has actually a long tradition of sour beers, because the oldest beer of the city of Berlin is the so-called Berliner Weisse, and that is a sour wheat beer, right? So using lactic acid bacteria for one part of fermentation. So a probiotic drink, I call it.
It's good for you.
And yeah, exactly. Well, Berliner Wellness, you could say.
Okay.
Berliner Wellness drink.
I like it.
Yeah, and so it has. There's also what I see, which is interesting, a revitalization of old German regional beer styles like Berliner Weisse, Gose, smoked lagers from Franconia, just these like specialty beers that always existed, but they were not really represented in the mass market for beer. And the beauty of the craft beer scene in Berlin is that it showcases the beautiful diversity, the different colors, flavors, and also offers, let's say, American styles, incredible like New England style IPAs or West Coast IPAs, or traditional English stuff, English style stouts or Irish style stouts. And it is the same story with the beer, like with the food. It's like really representing the internationality, also in the context of the diversity of beers within the kingdom of beers, you could say. And then also there's, I think in Berlin, and Berlin always has been a pioneer city for that. Berlin has a kind of ingrained anti-authoritarian attitude, I would say, yeah, and a kind of, I wouldn't say anti-corporate, but let's put it this way. I think Berliners have always been more likely to support your local small business, and in this way, basically support your neighborhood project. And if it's like €2 more, then people see the value in that and rather put the €2 more in the pockets of the small entrepreneur or small business than putting it into the pockets of the big corporations, beer corporations that historically dominated the beer market in Germany and still do, honestly, right? I mean, the craft beer sector in Germany is still, compared, let's say, to the States, for example, is minor, but it's growing. It's growing fast. And Berlin, for certain cultural and also economic reasons, turned into the hub for a really interesting experimental craft beer scene, as well as also paying homage to traditional styles, but brewed in a small microbrewery with better ingredients, with more times for fermentation, and just also going back to the good old craftsmanship, to offering artisanal products that people can relate to. They know where it comes from, who they support with buying that stuff, right? And this is all these little factors created an incredibly interesting independent microbrewing and craft beer scene here in the city. And that is, of course, what we're going to showcase, just really zoomed in on a micro level. And Friedrichshain, there's a lot more to it. You can go to Kreuzberg and you find also incredible brew pubs and tap rooms and so on. For us, Friedrichshain is where we know the people since a long time, where we hang out a lot, and where it really also concentrates, where you have also the pioneers for microbrewing and craft beer in the city. And so that is why we chose Friedrichshain. But you could also go to other districts, and in general, all over Berlin, you find a really interesting microbrewing and craft beer scene these days.
So glad to see that they're embracing the craft beer. When I was in Berlin several years ago, I noticed a lot of the beer halls were the big corporate ones, and they only served their particular beer. And in fact, a lot of them were from Munich, which I thought was
totally.
which was a little unusual. So I'm glad to see that Berlin is kind of taking it back and making their own beer. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, I noticed you guys have a vegan food tour, and I'm always glad when I see food tour companies do this, because so many times you'll see folks who are vegetarian or vegan get shut out from food tours because there just isn't availability for them. All the places where they're going serve meat, and you guys, not only do you cater to vegans, but you have a specific vegan food tour. Tell me about that, if you could.
Yeah, so the vegan tour is something that we love very much, and I wish more people would take it, because the food on it is incredible and is not only, just good for vegans. Everyone who comes on this tour, a lot of times we will get, let's say a family of 4, and one person on the tour is vegan, but the rest is along for the ride, and everyone ends up loving this tour. And the food itself, we try again, like, to highlight the international food and flavors of Berlin, which some of them are just naturally vegan, and some of them have a couple of vegan alternatives, but we're not serving vegan schnitzel, vegan currywurst, a bunch of tofu based things. Because again, vegan food is a lot more than just, having an alternative. So we have, a lot of different vegetables, or for example, one of my favorite dishes on the vegan tour is, a Turkish dumpling, which can be made with meat, but this one is made with potato and spinach. And then it also has, a vegan yogurt that is put on top, but it is so incredibly tasty, and it would, like I said, it's good for everyone. And we are really lucky here in Berlin, because Berlin is, I think it changes every year, but it is one of the top 2 cities in the world of, vegan friendliness, based on how many options and places there are to vegan food. And we can also offer, for example, on the street food tour, can be fully vegan, just because and it's in Berlin, you cannot get away with not having vegan options. And many of the restaurants that you go to, you might see a longer list of options for the vegans than, meat eaters. So, which is cool. But
I like it.
the vegan tour, like I said, I wish that more people would be interested and open-minded, because it is really a tour that is for everyone, and there's not a bite on there that people don't enjoy.
I think people are sometimes put off by the word vegan, and they don't understand that it's not just vegan food, it's good food.
Yes.
One of my favorite restaurants in Lisbon, and it's been ranked at the very top of all restaurants in Lisbon for all kinds of food, happens to be a vegan restaurant. And I take people there who are not vegan all the time, just because they make awesome food. And this is what people should think. Don't be put off by the word vegan, because, if you guys are curating these places, it's going to be quality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's maybe a good tip. Maybe we should change the name and just call it Friedrichshain Food Tour. And at the end, we tell them, by the way, this is a vegan tour.
Guess what? Everything you ate was vegan.
Yeah. We are on like one of our street food tours. We have a vegan taco, and people try it, eat it. I ask them like, what do you think? What kind of meat it is? And people, they're guessing chicken, pork, and then I tell them it's actually a vegan taco, and they make their own homemade seitan there. So basically kind of a wheat protein, nicely marinated and so on, and people are completely flashed. So you're right. That's, I think, a big aspect of it. The term has a connotation, and not necessarily the most popular connotation. Then veganism, I think sometimes is seen a bit kind of a movement that wants to tell other people what to do or not to do, almost like in a context of like militant veganism, let's say. And obviously, people don't like when you tell them what you should do. And that doesn't mean I tell people like you should be vegan, or that I think everyone should be vegan. But I think these things have this kind of, at least in Germany, in the context of a broader societal level, and I think in the States it's probably similar, that this term veganism, vegans, the vegans again, they want to tell me like I should not eat meat and should care more about my environment or so. All these things lead to these stereotypical images and preconceived notions of veganism and vegan food. And I think in a lot of other places, the vegan options are kind of half-hearted. And in Berlin, people find out the first time that vegan food can actually be very, very tasty, or like you said, in your restaurant in Lisbon. And I think what I always find really rewarding and interesting is that when people, non-vegans, take our vegan tour, you see kind of how their perspective changed after the tour, where they see, oh my God, that's so good. And I would definitely order that again, even though I'm not a vegan. So that is, I think, one aspect of it, this kind of connotation that people have a bit, and think like vegan food is always bland and doesn't have any taste, but that's obviously not true. And like Margot also said, there are a lot of ethnic food in the city that plays a role, like Vietnamese, biggest Asian community in Berlin are Vietnamese, to Turkish and so on, happen to be already very vegetarian and vegan friendly. And that is also what we showcase on our tour, on the vegan tour.
I'll just add one thing to make an additional point to the one that you made, Alex, which is when you travel, hopefully what you're trying to do is open your mind, open your perspective, get new ideas. So I would say, try the vegan tour. Maybe it will open your mind a little bit. Who knows? You might not turn vegan. You might not be wearing Birkenstocks and eating granola all day long, but maybe, it might change your viewpoint a little bit to understand. So anyway,
absolutely.
My 2 cents. Well, Margot and Alex from Walk With Us Tours, it's been great talking to you. This has been a delightful conversation about a city that I love, Berlin. We'll have links to your website so folks can book a tour through you in the show notes. Folks can get that in the description. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Brent. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's Margot and Alex from Walk With Us Tours. What a fascinating conversation. I think I could talk with them for hours about the food and history of Berlin. You can find Margot and Alex at walkwithustours.com. I've also got a link in the show description. Well, that's it for this week. Next week, we are in Tallinn for Estonian Jägermeister, a sandwich dilemma, and eating Christmas trees. That's right. Don't miss that. Until then, get over to destinationeatdrink.com, where I just posted a story about Diego Velázquez and the sights you can see related to the famous Spanish painter in his hometown of Seville, Spain. Read that at destinationeatdrink.com/blog. I also just posted a new video. This one is the best vegan food in Lisbon. You might think Lisbon is all about fish and pork and custard tarts, but you can find some of the most amazing vegan food in Lisbon. It's really one of my favorite vegan foodie cities in the entire world, and these dishes will satisfy even the most hardcore carnivore. You can see that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com or go to YouTube. My YouTube channel is at destinationeatdrink946. And if you like the show, please consider making a one-time or recurring contribution at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. Thanks to everyone who's contributed. And if you're thinking about it, buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. Thank you. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson. I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.